So I wanted to explain a little bit the difference between the kinds of things that that Rachel and Callie are doing as opposed to what I'm working on, because we're all fully involved in this, um, but uh, but don't really talk to each other every day about it, because um, they're involved in the actual workings of the taxonomy and the application every day to the articles that are then published on the website. Um, I'm working in what we now call publishing services, which didn't exist at PLOS before I got there. Um, and it's basically operational. It's the workflows, it's how we get the articles from submission through to the point where they get published. And so my view on this is a little bit different, and as you've heard alluded to before, um, I until just a year ago I was working with art at AACR, where I helped put the taxonomy in place there, and so I have a lot of applications in my head for, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this or that with the data that we're getting. So what I want to talk about today is a little bit of some work that we did with Access Innovations and with Kevin's group, which I never know whether we call it SciTech Strategies or Map of Science, but whatever, visualization stuff. And because we don't coordinate these things, you'll see some slides here that'll look a little familiar in relation to some of the things that Rachel talked about, and then I'm sort of giving you a preview of some of the things that you'll see in Kevin's talk as well. So, if you don't get it after seeing it 3 or 4 times, I can't help you. Okay. All right, so I'm going to also give you a tiny bit of background on PLOS in case you missed it, and on Rachel's slides. Talk a little bit about the project that we did, which was basically talking about indexing the historic data and trying to glean some information from that, to talk about how the coverage in our, what is really a big database of articles, has changed over time, and then looking at that journal by journal, as well as a big whole. And then the piece that Kevin got involved with, which was visualizing the results of that, and I'll show you a little bit of that. And then how it fed into some decision making that actually we're involved in right now. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some new things, the stuff that Rachel stopped talking about at the end of her talk, which is basically some new tools for workflow. And a project that we're doing actually right now, which is sort of interesting. So it's a little bit of a preview. We're not finished with it, but maybe we'll talk about that next year if things go well. Okay, so as we heard, PLOS has been publishing for 10 years. This is now our 11th year. We do get about 4,500 submissions per month. PLOS ONE alone gets about 200 submissions a day. And we have 7 journals. We're based in San Francisco, where Callie and I work, and in Cambridge, where Rachel works. And we've been self-sustaining since 2010. We're really proud of having gotten there. Okay, and as you saw, this is a little bit different presentation, but it's basically the same information, how the journals came to be. The main difference among these journals is PLOS Biology, PLOS Medicine are sort of the most selective of the journals. They have internal editorial staff, internal editors-in-chief, although they work extensively with external academic editors in evaluating papers. The community journals all have external editors-in-chief, like most journals have. And PLOS ONE doesn't have an editor-in-chief. It's just, the community decides what papers to select. Okay, and I just want to talk a little bit about PLOS ONE. It's a little bit of a repetition, but it is important to recognize, because I'm going to talk a bit about how the workflow for PLOS ONE works a little bit later. the editorial criteria are quite different, where many journals get submissions and, most of their work is deciding what, how to cut things out and be efficient by finding the things that are the gems and publishing those, rejecting most of everything else. PLOS ONE sort of turns that around and says, we're not going to evaluate things based on how important it might be, or, is it groundbreaking or that kind of thing. It's basically, is this work well done? Has the research been done appropriately? And are the conclusions supported by the data? And if that's the case, then we publish. So we still have a very rigorous editorial process, but the editors don't ask how important it is. They just decide whether or not the work has been done appropriately. Okay, so the journal's not limited in its size, which contributes to the fact that we've published over 84,000 articles. By last December, PLOS as a whole had published more than 100,000 articles, so that was a lot in 10 years. Okay. So here's what we were trying to do. We wanted to say, we've got all this stuff now, especially in PLOS ONE, where there isn't a strict scope for the journal. It is, by virtue of what it has in it, it defines itself as basically biomedical. But each of the other journals has a scope, a very definite one. So we wanted to look not just for PLOS ONE to see how it was growing and changing over time, but looking at each of the smaller journals to help them look at what their scopes were looking like. You have a stated scope. Does your content actually match that scope? How's it changing over time? Are the things that you hope to cover, are you actually getting those articles and publishing them? So it was a little bit of that. And then looking at one of the things that we were offered in this was a look at what does the literature look like and how are we comparing ourselves against that. So we called that the market, which ended up being very large at 25 million articles. And I saw in your slides you are saying it's Scopus, so I'll say it's Scopus, a big database. And sort of looking at what were their patterns, where were they seeing large areas of growth, and should we be looking at some of those same areas, that kind of thing. So what we did was we grabbed a lot of stuff. We had about 85,000 records of what we had published for about 6.5 years. And then we had that large commercial A&I database, Scopus, and we took a look at all of that data. And then we visualized it. I'm going to show some of the slides just of, how this looked. And so I warn you right now, don't ask me questions about the visualizations because Kevin will explain all of that. But generally, I just want to talk a little bit about the way we looked at this. This is our whole thesaurus. This isn't a map of articles that have been published. This is a map of the thesaurus itself. And so it has, so let me walk over here for a second and tell you that this light green stuff, actually it looks more green on my computer, but what is down here is sort of biology, and this pink is medicine and health. The darker green over here is ecology and environment. The brown is earth sciences. The purple is physical sciences. This pretty bluish teal color is computer science?
It's engineering.
I wrote it down.
Engineering.
Engineering technology. The pink over here, the light pink, is computer science. This other peachy color over here is social sciences. The gray is people and places. I missed something. Oh, the yellow. The yellow is methods. So methods all over the place because they're methods associated with lots of different areas. So it basically, it shows us a couple of things. The depth of indexing and the specificity of indexing is highest in the areas where we have most of our coverage. Biology, medicine, all the stuff at the bottom. Where our thesaurus is broader of necessity, because why would we bother creating lots of levels of terms where we don't need them yet? I say yet. And that's sort of the top area. Physical sciences, computer science, and areas like that, which engineering, we just don't have a lot of coverage in those. So we can see sort of what this looks like in the future. We can do the same kind of map and see how is it changing. Are we getting more specific in some of the areas where maybe we have increasing coverage over time? So part of what we did was an interesting way of giving feedback to Rachel, who is maintaining the thesaurus, and part of it is looking at how's our coverage changing, which is feedback to the editorial staff. So I'm just going to show a little bit of PLOS ONE. This is all 6.5 years, but I want to show you how it changes over time, which is sort of interesting. So this is 2008, which is about, I guess, 2 years into its life. Started in 2006. And so you can see it's, this doesn't work real well here. It's mostly down here, mostly biology. And it's getting more and more here, and then more pink, so medicine comes in. And all of a sudden we start to see some ecology here, and some social science coming in, a little smattering of stuff up here. And then even more intensely in here, lots and lots more of these research and analytical methods as well, the yellow that's sort of underlying all of that. And then 2013, we're even getting some of the earth sciences and even more ecology. So it's really interesting to look at the visual of how this has changed over time. I know I think maybe you showed this last year. We did this, and the reason I wanted to do it again was we had done this with AACR data across the journals and looked at how they were sort of overlapping and how they changed over time as well. This is really a very different look at it, but it's the same sort of idea. And so along with this, and this is, the visual is great to get that sort of gestalt of how things are changing and what they look like over time. But we also got lots of data as well. So we got big spreadsheets, and so we did a separate analysis of those as well that is ongoing. I have not finished it. I don't know that it can be finished, but we've been working on, what can we get out of this? What can it tell us? And so some of the questions we were looking at is, looking at the big picture, the Scopus data, which was also indexed with the PLOS taxonomy. How is that changing? What does that look like? And then how is PLOS ONE sort of compared to that? Obviously, there's some areas where, because Scopus is, all encompassing, there are whole areas that we just aren't there. One of the subject areas that was growing the fastest, maybe the fastest, was cloud computing. Well, we just don't cover that kind of stuff, so we just weren't playing in that arena. So we're looking for, if we're not growing in the areas where the literature generally is growing, are we missing some opportunities? Maybe in the areas where we're already strong, are there places where we could be better? But let's make some decisions too. Let's decide, are we going to say, our scope is in this box, or are we going to continue to expand to whatever we want to do? So those are still open questions. But this also helped us to determine what are our particular areas of strength. You know, the editors all say, yeah, we sort of know that, but it's nice to have that, you know, especially at the lower levels. Like they might say, yeah, we're really strong in neuroscience, we're good there. But what aspects of that? So we can look at the different levels of the hierarchy and see where is it that we're really showing the most impact. And then we took additional data. So we could take something like neuroscience and that branch and look at all the things underneath it. And then also look at what else is going on there. What kind of usage do those areas get? What kind of citation rates do those papers get? What's our acceptance rate in that area? Is it high also? Are we getting good papers to begin with? And so we're also looking at marrying what we've done here in this project with other data that we can pull out of our, our article level metrics in other places. And then looking at, so this was a little interesting, PLOS ONE coverage was growing in almost every area because PLOS ONE was growing in every area. So we did, I did a little figuring to see what the average growth rate of PLOS data was over time. And in terms of article growth, I think I looked at 2010 through 2012, it was over 300%. So then I knew when I went back to look at areas of growth, I needed to look for things that were even bigger than that, because everything seemed big. Everything was growing. So where were the new areas that were emerging that we might want to foster? So those were some of the questions that we asked, and so, what do we know about our scope? What are the expanding areas? So, for example, one of them is at some point a couple of years ago, we experienced something interesting in relation to the area of paleontology. Not something that we would normally be covering, not really biomedical in nature, but somebody got the idea that amongst a group of people that they would start submitting to PLOS ONE, and all of a sudden we had paleontology coverage. Well, that's great, except we don't have editors in that area. Who's gonna sort of foster those articles through the system? What about reviewers? We had to build to maintain that and to support it. So there's a lot of things that, so this is, so the back and forth between marketing and editorial. Marketing wants to go out and sell this and say, you should submit your papers to PLOS ONE, and we're going, well, wait a second. So, ecology is another area. That's great. We should have these campaigns, but let's do it where we can support it. So it's sort of interesting to work in the middle between these two groups. And one of the examples of the kinds of stuff that I've been working on and writing up for the editorial group has been along this line, where I looked at ecology and environmental science, which is one of our top level pieces of the hierarchy, and even though only 9% of the PLOS ONE articles have been tagged with anything within that place, there's areas where there's a huge amount of growth, and we, in an opportunistic sort of way, the Ecological Society of America met in San Francisco last year, and we went and we pushed, and people are submitting. So, these kinds of things sort of get legs, and it's great. And this analysis enabled us to look at specific areas where things were really moving, and maybe where we needed to think about going out and finding some editors who could help us with these areas. and places within there where we weren't actually gaining as much as we might have, because the rest of the literature is growing faster than what we were doing. So other opportunities to look for are these places where we might go out and find some more people and some more papers. So that's sort of the kind of thing that we've been working on. I just wanted to mention a couple of other applications that we are working on. One of them is, I know Rachel mentioned that right now the only place we are actually applying the classifications is at the time of publication. So it's been sort of built into the system that publishes onto the web. And so we have, none of that information is earlier in the process. We don't have any access to it. And so it was one of the things when I got to PLOS, I said, so why aren't we using this in the manuscript system? And they said, well, no, we really just wanted it over this end. And I'm sort of an annoying person, and I just kept pushing until we have a project to do that. And so we're doing that like right now. So hopefully this week we will be substituting the new terms in for the old terms. So the 3,100 terms that are sitting in Editorial Manager now will go away, and we'll have the new thesaurus terms in there. It's what, 10,000 some odd. That's the first step. And then beyond that, we're working on an API with our vendor Aries to work with us to get a process so that when an author submits an article, we index it, bring it back into the system, and then that information's available all the way through the process. And that'll let us do a whole lot of other things, including help us with reviewer matching and editor matching. So when I was at AACR and we needed to find an editor for an incoming paper, we looked at the paper and we looked at the list of editors and we said, okay, we'll send it to this guy. Well, when you've got 200 papers coming in a day and you've got 5,000 editors, it doesn't work so well. So we have a system for matching people to papers. And what we're hoping to do is use that information that gets indexed at the beginning of that process and index the people information by the same taxonomy. So using the same rules to fingerprint on both ends and then making the matches, and then extending that to reviewers as well. So this is our wish list for this year. Yeah, we'll have to think of something to do next year, but that's one of the big things that we're doing. The other thing that's a little bit further in the future, and something that Jonas and I are working on, is the reviewer and editor matching. A project that we have been doing for the past month or so is this identification of submissions that are likely to be rejected. Okay, so yeah, 200 manuscripts a day. There's got to be a better way of filtering those and saying, okay, which ones can we shuffle off to another editor and have them just make a call to say, is this worth sending to review or not? Because what happens with PLOS ONE, our process is very, very time and staff intensive and vendor intensive. And so what happens is, things go through this process and we keep looking for an editor to handle the paper and no one picks it up, and it goes on. And if we could identify those things up front, things that are not going to go anywhere because no one wants to touch them, then maybe we could do something with those more quickly. It doesn't mean, as some people have suggested, oh, so you'll just run this analysis and reject those papers. No, that's not what we want to do. We're just trying to figure out a way to deal with things that may be rejected a little bit more, with a little bit more efficiency rather than throwing them in with everything else and hoping that somebody picks them up. So we've been working with Margie on this, and we've got 2 years worth of rejected papers from PLOS ONE that we pulled out of our system, and 2 years worth of published papers, and we're looking for what are the things that will predict which group things fall into. And it's been really interesting so far. We're going to talk about this a little bit on Thursday. We had some ideas about, okay, maybe it's funding. Papers that don't get funded, that don't have any funding, are they likely to be accepted, or are they likely to be, less good because a funder wouldn't even put some money behind them? We don't know. One of the things that's come out that was a little surprising, I guess, was that the only predictor we could see so far was that single-authored papers don't get accepted. That's really changed over time. In the 60s, we still had loads and loads of papers that were 1 and 2 authors. And that's really, really shifted. And we saw that growing year on year. So we used to do this kind of analysis when I worked at ISI. And we looked at our database of, loads and loads of articles and what were the characteristics of these papers. And one of the things we saw growing in a huge way was authorship, and many, many more people on papers. And today, where we have a lot of big science, the numbers so the average is going up and up. And so one of the things we saw in this analysis was papers that have one author are much more likely to be rejected than papers that have lots of authors. So we're continuing to work on that to see, is it totally papers from China, or is it papers from China that are in agriculture and from this particular university or whatever it is. So that's what we're looking for. What are the predictors? That's it.